Hello, good morning. Welcome back to some instant takes from the closing week of week 13. This one, I think the Big Ten's in big trouble. I think Ohio State is too. I've said this before. I've told Wetzel this. Now I'm going to tell you guys this. Current top four teams, Ohio State is the worst team. Yes, they've got Justin Fields, very good, very dynamic quarterback. Yes, they've got some very talented receivers. They don't have a great running game. Master Teague stepped up against Indiana, had a good game, but he's more of a power runner. He's not really dynamic like we're used to seeing out of Ohio State backs with J.K. Dobbins, Ezekiel Elliott, stuff like that. He's more of a power back. Trey Sermon hasn't really done anything for him. Their offensive line is just okay, not really anything special. Defensive line's getting better. That secondary, very, very weak. Linebacking core, just okay. So all around, I mean, outside of the receivers and Justin Fields, I don't. This isn't a bold take. This is like true. This is like one of the least talented Ohio State teams in years. Yes, they've got all these five-star recruits and stuff like that, but they lost a lot last year. They really did. And I think the biggest thing about that is when you look at the secondary, giving up 491 yards and 5 touchdowns to Michael Penix. Not going to cut it. That's a major red flag. And, I get it. They're up by a lot. And people are like, oh, well, they pulled their starters and blah, 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 happens when you get a big lead. No, not necessarily, because they didn't pull their starters. They had Sean Wade out there. They had other, starters out there. It's not like they were playing their second team. And then, well, you take out the two big throws and, it's really like a 42-21 game. Well, if you take out the two big throws, then let's take out the pick six, 35-21. That's still not great. I mean, they were supposed to beat them by 20-plus points. You can't just take out the two big throws because that's where the red flags come up. Michael Penix Jr. is not a downfield thrower, really. And he was throwing the ball downfield, carving your defense up that way. And, people like, oh, he had his best career game against backups. He didn't. Again, he didn't. They kept their starters in. Here's the thing. Take that game out of his career the last 2 years. He's averaging 240 yards per game. He's averaging 1.7 touchdowns per game. You factor that in, and he's averaging 2 touchdowns per game. He's averaging 280 yards passing per game. It's, it inflates his numbers so much. And that's where my red flag's been, I haven't seen any playmakers on this Ohio State defense. Usually they've got playmakers, whether it's a linebacker, cornerback, safety, defensive lineman. I haven't really seen anybody that's like, okay, in a big late game situation, we need to stop. This is going to be our guy. Still waiting for that. Unfortunately for them, they don't really have big tests left. And that's my next point about the Big Ten. The Big Ten's down this year, and it's also screwing itself over right now. Let's say Ohio State wins out. They play Michigan. Michigan State win. Northwestern just lost to Michigan State, who's not very good, as we have seen. So that's the team they're playing right now because Wisconsin's eliminated itself due to COVID problems. Northwestern still has to go to Minnesota next week. It's not an easy win. they still play the Illini. Illini have gotten better since the start of the year. They really have. If they lose another game, the best team they'll have played will be Indiana, and I'm not so sure Indiana wins out. They have to play Wisconsin next week. Could happen. So if the best team they play is a 2-loss team, and they're going in to the playoffs because they're sitting there in that top 4, and it's like, oh, it's Ohio State. It doesn't matter. No, it does matter. If they go into the playoffs, their best wins against a 2-win team. They played Northwestern in the title game. This defense won't have been challenged defensively enough for me to be convinced that they're going to go in and beat Notre Dame, that they're going to go in and beat Clemson, that they're going to go in beat Alabama, that they're going to go in beat A&M, beat Florida, beat Cincinnati. Like, there's not a team in that top 6, top 7 that I think they could beat convincingly. I mean, they probably could beat some of those teams, but with the question marks that I have, and I haven't had any of those answered, I'm not sure they could beat a team convincingly that's up in the top 7. The Big Ten also, with that loss against Northwestern, really shot itself in the foot, starting to cannibalize itself a little bit like the Big 12. The only thing that would make it worse would be Wisconsin winning next week, along with Minnesota. That would be hard. That would be hard for the Big Ten, because then your second best team, or your best team in the West, Wisconsin, isn't eligible because they've hurt themselves with their own COVID, and then Minnesota had COVID. I mean, Wisconsin's got Indiana, then Iowa. Let's say they win those 2 games and they get to 4-1. If you're Ohio State and they get their next 2 games in, you're kind of sitting there kicking yourself in the face because, hey, we should be playing that team. We shouldn't be playing this team. And we should be playing Northwestern. Northwestern at Minnesota versus Illinois. Yikes. And the problem, too, with Northwestern is they've got a great defense. They really do. I think they'll challenge Justin Fields where Indiana did as well. I think he might struggle again, which brings more questions to him and the offensive line. I don't think the offensive line can pass block very well. I think him under pressure isn't as good as we think he is. He struggled in the Clemson game last year, and that was really the only game he was under pressure last year. Ended up losing that game. Indiana, he struggled again this year. He was under pressure. I think Northwestern could do the same. I really do. But offensively, they don't have enough skill or talent to really pressure that defense. They don't. But yeah, I mean, if Indiana loses this week and then Minnesota beats Northwestern, then the Big 12 will have Big 10 will have fully cannibalized itself like the Big 12, and really just hurts Ohio State. I think I need to see more from Ohio State defensively in order to be convinced that they're not going to struggle in the playoff. And that's the problem. I don't think we're going to see that. Michigan State's not really dynamic offensively. Michigan, not really dynamic offensively either. I mean, Michigan State, sure, Lombardi's had a couple nice games, but, you're still working in the first-year head coach that hasn't really fully gotten his system in. They lose to Rutgers the opening game of the season, go into the Big House, beat Michigan. Okay, that's great. Lose by 42 at Iowa. lose by 24 without scoring a single point against Indiana. Maryland game canceled. Northwestern beat them by 9. So it's like, what Michigan State are we going to see next week when they play Ohio State? Who knows? Who knows? And then you got Michigan, and Michigan hasn't looked great offensively, haven't looked great like anywhere really. So, Ohio State will probably run over them. So, I mean, I've got a lot of concerns about Ohio State, and I just don't think they'll be answered. I definitely think out of the top 4 teams, they're the weakest, and they've shown the biggest holes. And I don't know if they can fix those holes. But yeah, that's 2 of my hot takes so far after this week. If you guys want to hear anything else, let me know.